sure that I've got my everything where it's supposed to be. Testing, sound good, great. Review, da 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 da. Last chapter for before the test, or final, or whatever. The book calls this chapter an anxious affluence. I'm not a big fan of that title. This is the Roaring Twenties. This is post World War One. Our economy is doing really well. Things go pretty good for the most part for about 10 years, and then everything crashes down in 1929, which, if you're not already aware, that's when the Great Depression hits. Now, as we're going to see going forward, it's not just like, and then suddenly the stock market crashes out of nowhere and nobody saw it coming, which is often how it's viewed, which is incorrect. A lot of people were like, hey, things are kind of unstable. Maybe we should stop doing a lot of what we're doing. But, well, who listens to that, right? So there was already signs that this was going to happen. But it was a lot worse than a lot of even the people that were seeing something bad coming saw coming. So, anyway, that's why the entire next chapter is just like the Great Depression, and then the New Deal attempting to fix it. But anyway, yeah, let's talk about post-war America. So after the First World War, the government continued to use the power it had to suppress the freedom of American citizens who were considered not loyal. The Espionage Act was used to uphold the conviction of Charles Schenek, who was Secretary General of the Socialist Party. He was convicted of mailing leaflets that opposed the draft. Supreme Court's decision was presented by Justice Oliver Holmes. It stated that the wartime Congress had the authority to prohibit individuals from using words that create, quote, a clear and present danger to the safety of the country. So, you know, who cares about the First Amendment? Now, while the First World War was over, this clear and present danger shifted to Russia. Now, while the Bolshevik Revolution had happened, the USSR was not yet a thing. With the Bolsheviks attempting to gain power, the Tsarist forces were still fighting back, so there was this massive civil war happening in Russia. Wilson, as well as, like, I believe France, Britain, and I know Japan sent forces into Russia to attempt to help the anti-Bolshevik forces there as well. Bolshevik forces is there. Led to an outcry among those who supported the Russian Revolution because, well, in addition to those who felt like we should support the working class against the, ruling elite, this was also like an anti-monarchist movement because, well, the Russian ruling family were monarchists. They were, it was the Tsar. Even though today there's this sanitization of the Tsars as like, oh no, they were good nobles, because of the like anti-communist propaganda of the Cold War and how there's the whole like Disney Anastasia story and all of that, and how like, oh no, they were sympathetic nobles and totally not just like squeezing the poor for all they were worth. Not that the communist regime under like Stalin was necessarily a good thing, but Stalin was also a psychopath. There were some anarchists who dropped leaflets off a building in New York City's Lower East Side, called for a general strike until the U.S. pulled its troops out of Russia. I'll get into what a general strike is here in just a minute. They prosecuted 6 individuals for violating the Espionage and Sedition Acts, and the Supreme Court affirmed the verdict in the Abrams v. United States on November 10th, 1919. A general strike, I may have mentioned this in this class before, if not, that is where everybody goes out on strike. Not the steel workers or the dock workers or whatever. Everybody goes out. The teachers and the policemen and the bakers and everybody. Nobody goes to work. It shuts down everything, which is what Marx and Engels talked about in their Communist Manifesto, was if all the workers unite as a single group, then they are more powerful than the government, because they're 90% of the population, if not more. So, if all the workers were to band together and say, hey, we're not going to work until you pull the troops out of Russia, the government would have no choice but to do that. That, however, didn't happen, but that's what they were calling for. Anyway, there is Shinnick. Here are some of the leaflets that were passed around that got him arrested. Long live the Constitution of the United States. Wake up, America. Your liberties are in danger. And it gives a quote from the 13th Amendment, which is essentially saying, no slavery or neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as punishment for crime, where the party shall be duly convicted, shall exist in the United States, which is to say, well, for one, we still have slavery due to, prisons, but also that, like, sending people to war to die for your country via the draft, which is to say involuntarily sending people to die, is servitude, is involuntary servitude, which by definition is slavery. Here's a good one. You want some of this? Protesting is just un-American. Yeah. That aged real well. Here's another good one. This man subjected himself to imprisonment and probably to be shot or hanged. The prisoner used language tending to discourage men from enlisting in the United States Army. It is proven and indeed admitted that among his incendiary statements were, "Thou shalt not kill," and "Blessed are the peacemakers." In case, you can't tell from the picture who we're looking at here. But, yeah, how dare this radical leftist speak out against the U.S. government? Why, I bet he's a foreigner terrorist. Anyway, espionage bill, must liberties like go out. This is a little bit different. This is what the espionage and sedition bills were mainly about, was like, don't talk about troop deployments and war production, the sort of stuff that like would actually be used against the military. Like, say, it's unfortunate that I can actually use an example of this. Like, say, talking about war plans in an unsecured, mobile messaging app, and then accidentally, like, leak it to literally the press, that could have gotten, like, servicemen killed. That sort of thing. The sort of thing that, like, would normally be considered actually treason, even though it was a mistake. The sort of thing that, like, was, screamed about for years because of like email servers, but you know, just saying. Anyway, Army Medical Examiner, at last a perfect soldier. Don't worry, we don't need soldiers to think. We just need them to go out and murder for us. And here we have, these are some of the anarchists that were arrested. Here's some of the protests against the sending people into Russia, sending the army into Russia. I used this last semester with the sedition bill, but this is specifically when it's being used in this era. So again, you have over here traitor, spy. Again, Sinn Féin is included because they were Irish. Terrorists is really the only way to put it. But they were mostly operating against the British. I don't know why they're really included. And over here is, again, the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World. Because we really hated workers' unions. So, there was a Red Scare right after World War I, which, again, it feels weird to talk about, like, communism when we're not talking about the Cold War, but there was that. So, there was this underlying concern of the Red Scare, this fear of communism-inspired radicalism after the Russian Revolution, because technically this is where, I mean, I shouldn't say this is where it started, because, I mean, Marx and Engels have been around. But this is the first, like, government to become, well, again, we don't technically have the USSR yet, but it's becoming communist. So it never really had a foothold in America, but there were a number of extremists that kept the concern alive and allowed for ambitious politicians to use this to their advantage. Can you imagine ambitious politicians using the fear of something that's not actually happening to their own advantage? That just seems crazy. Also, there were some economic problems after the war. Industries were shifting from war production back to civilian production, but it took a little while because, I mean, shifting back from tanks to, say, cars, well, that's more World War II, but that's just the example I'm going to use. It takes a little bit. And also, during the war, more people had jobs and had more money, and also were rationing, so they had a bunch of money held back. So when the war was over, they wanted to spend that money, but since the production hadn't quite switched over to civilian production yet, there wasn't a lot of supply, which means not a lot of supply, a lot of demand, prices skyrocket, and also people are losing their jobs because these military jobs are going away, causing strikes, and therefore they blamed communism for it, even though low supply, high demand, causing prices to go up, and then also people are losing their jobs because, well, the job market's shrinking. That's all capitalism working as designed. Because, you know, the business owners aren't going to keep people around if they don't need them to make the production happen. They're going to cut jobs because they want to make all the profit possible. But, you know, let's blame the communists that aren't actually here. Inflation undercut wages, union busting actions by employers, so workers were put on the offensive. 1919, over 4 million workers initiated a general strike across the U.S., which I don't know what the population was in 1919. 4 million workers is still a lot, though, which, again, made people think, oh, no, the communists are here and they're going to take over, because, like, a general strike was how the Russian Revolution began, or the Bolshevik Revolution, I should say. There was a Russian Revolution before, but that's still a separate thing. So, like, there was this fear that, oh no, the communists are coming to get us next. So there's this, strikes and walkouts leading to disorder and riots, leading to Bolshevism and murders. Okay. Leading to chaos, leading to a flooded basement, I guess. Yeah, Green in the New York Evening Telegram. I guess when you're too busy doing Bolshevism and murders, you can't make sure the basement isn't flooding. Here's some weird song with Uncle Sam and like what looks like military fatigues, and really heavy makeup. We'll never change the blue and white to red, but it's not even like the communist flag. It's an anarchy flag, which isn't a thing, but okay. But it's just a red flag with anarchy written on it. I mean, there is an anarchy symbol, but I guess that wasn't really a thing yet back then. Coming to me, ye oppressed, except, Europeans, because they're weird and scary. And maybe anarchists. I do still love the cartoon bomb. Which was, that was what bombs looked like back then. They were just this sphere of gunpowder and shrapnel with a fuse on top. That's what killed Alexander the First? No, Alexander the Second in Russia. So more Bolshevists, anarchists. One killed, 40 injured in riots, 125 arrested in Red May Day parade, etc., etc. We'll get to that in a minute. What? Cleveland Plain Dealer. What a name for a newspaper. Cleveland's weird. Not called for. Return to sender. Disloyal aliens. Violence advocates, and IWW leaders. We're gonna, again, put all them in the same category. We can't digest the scum. So we have world's melting pot, but at the top, red flag, IWW, once again. Bolshevism, the mad notions of Europe. Okay. Anarchy, un-American ideals. This is stuff we're going to have to scrape out because we can't, apparently, that doesn't work with the melting pot of the world. Mad notions of Europe. Here we have some weird, Errol Flynn stuff going on. American industry being attacked by communist pirates, I guess? Is this tomorrow? America under communism. Now, while the civil wars in Russia were certainly really bad. It was, I want to say more people died in the civil wars and the famines afterwards than died in World War I, because, again, Russia doesn't do anything under, several million dead anytime they do anything. Once communism, took hold as the government in Russia, they weren't, burning things down and murdering each other in the streets, as policy. That doesn't really work. I get as a policy change, it would probably be violent. But if we just decided, okay, we're communists now, so we're going to murder each other in the streets as communist policy. I don't know. That just feels like what this is saying. It's like, if we turn communist, we're just going to, stab each other in the street, because that's what communists do. So here is a walkout at the Skinner and Eddy Corporation. Going out on strike, because that's all you can do, is to withhold your labor from the company until the company is willing to listen to your demands. Because otherwise they treat you like crap. I mean, they're still going to treat you like crap, but you have to act in solidarity and show that the workers are the ones who run the company. Because without workers, you ain't got a company. Here is the result of a lot of these strikes. The police come in and use violence to break up the strikes. Because the police work for the corporations, not the people. Here we have Seattle, and since this was in black and white, it had a bright red on the flag. Again, we didn't quite have the hammer and sickle flag yet. Here we have not just police, but now National Guard coming in to ensure that the corporations are protected. Because, again, that's who they're working for. So, the 1919 strikes affected steel, transportation, and shipbuilding industries. In Boston, the policemen went on strike, which is rare, which left the city unguarded, so there was looting and violence. Massachusetts Governor Calvin Coolidge, who eventually became president, but we won't really talk about him, sent in the National Guard to break the strike and restore order. Obviously, newspapers wanting to sell more exaggerated the role that communists had in such events, as there were not actually very many socialists or communists there, which is to say there weren't very many socialists or communists in America anyway. I don't know if I've mentioned this in this class, because we talked about it in my European history class. We've actually talked about the Second International. There was this meeting of socialism in Europe, and there was a split in I believe it was the late 1800s between what became socialism, which is changing the system from within, using essentially democracy to be voted into the system and make things better for workers, et cetera, and communism, which is, well, where is it at? This, which is the violent overthrow of the system in power, which is what happened in Russia. And equating the two is ignorant. Oftentimes, people who equate the two are doing so on purpose. But yeah, they're not the same. Still, there were enough radicals that, well, people were able to use it to their advantage. May 1st, 1919, 30 incendiary devices were sent through the mail, but authorities were able to find them and disarm them. In, June, yeah, I know my months. Bombs exploded in 8 cities, including the doorstep of A. Mitchell Palmer, who was the Secretary General of the U.S. He was not actually there. He was uninjured. But he did decide to do a McCarthyism before McCarthy was a thing. So the Palmer raids occurred in 30 cities across the United States, which typically just targeted immigrants because, hey, they don't really have rights, so let's do that. Thousands were arrested and held without legal counsel. I'll actually read this out of the book. Yeah. Authorities seized approximately 6,000 suspected radicals from their homes and community centers, took them to police stations, interrogated them without benefit of legal counsel, and held them incommunicado, which is to say, without them being able to communicate with anybody, which is illegal, without stipulating the charges against them, which again is illegal. Of the thousands arrested, the government found reason to deport 556. And the 556 barely had any solid evidence either. But, you know, America. The raids failed to uncover extensive plots to overthrow the U.S. government, nor did they lead to the arrest of the actual bombers that started the whole thing. So we have some more of the strikes. Please vote to strike tonight. Walk out at 5:45. Actually, I've got, yeah, there's the National Guard going in. I mean, look at these like Britain-ass police helmets they've got going on here. There's the police going out on strike. The striking policeman is the ally of, I guess, just crime in general. I'm still on duty, will not go out in sympathy with a striking policeman, which is just to say crime, because crime is always on duty. Ha ha ha! I don't know. The early 1900s were weird. One of the few loyal policemen on guard in Boston during the Reign of Terror. Oh, so dramatic. He's doing a great job. And there's keeping warm. Sick and tired of this nonsense with the coal strike. Yeah, that's how you do it. That's how you respectfully deal with the coal strike. Stop before it's too late. Thanks, Seattle. There's sometimes the strikes would get a little out of hand. I don't think these cars weighed a whole lot compared to cars of today. There's Palmer and his house. Here's another angle. It really just kind of blew out the windows because it was like a brick and, I want to say, not marble, granite facade. So, like, you couldn't damage that thing. You could drive into it with a car and your car would be destroyed. Because the dude had a lot of money and they built houses a whole lot stronger back then than they do today. So yeah, it just like knocked the windows out. So yeah, dude was fine. Here are some American Socialist Party offices that were raided with, no kind of warrants because, hey, they're socialists and also immigrants, so they don't have any rights. They're probably up to something. So they would raid them, arrest the people inside, grab a bunch of documents that were totally had evidence of stuff happening in them. Police searching a group of armed suspects at police headquarters in Chicago. Oklahoma City for alleged radicals. Perfect cases against 2,613 of 4,500 persons arrested in nationwide radical raids, which, as we just saw from the book, only about 550 actually were deported. So these perfect cases aren't quite correct. So, what did this result in? Well, at first Americans were totally cool with this because, the immigrants aren't really Americans, so who cares? However, they soon realized that, hey, if people can be arrested for no real reason, that could really quickly be turned on everybody else. And the sooner people realize that, the better. They soon saw this as being more dangerous to American liberties than a handful of communists. So a group of pacifists, progressives, and constitutional lawyers formed the American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLU, which is not a place I'd want to join because they are so busy all the time. They do good work, but they're always busy. They get no rest. They monitored government actions that violated the Bill of Rights. The Palmer raids ended, but they, as I said, get no rest because they soon had to keep up with J. Edgar Hoover using the Bureau of Investigation to spy on Americans, and had to, say, hey, you can't do that. That's against the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Oh, by the way, J. Edgar Hoover is in charge of the Bureau of Investigation now. Remember, he was in charge of the Food Administration last time we saw him? Well, he's in charge of this now. He's going to be in charge of a couple of other federal agencies before we finish this chapter. But worse than, like, the Red Scare was something that happened right at the end of the war. In late 1918, an influenza epidemic spread across the world. This followed the soldiers home and infected about 20% of the American population, killed about 675,000 people. Obviously, infants and the elderly were affected the worst, but able-bodied men and women also became sick and died in large numbers. Between 50 and 100 million people worldwide died. Now, it was called the Spanish flu because it happened while the war was still going on, and none of the countries in the war wanted to report on it because it would cause morale to drop. I mean, imagine like getting ready to go over to fight in the war and hearing that like hundreds of thousands of people are dying from essentially the flu. That would suck. But Spain was technically neutral in the war because it wasn't on the front lines. And they were reporting on the flu, so it became known as the Spanish flu. Because, well, Spain's reporting on it, so they must be the ones dealing with it. Turns out, based on historical records and what we were able to find out, it probably maybe started in Arkansas, near a military base, and then we sent it to Europe. Oops. And then it spread all over the world because of troops returning home. So, a couple of things about the Spanish flu, the 1918 influenza epidemic. So it mentions that the young and elderly were the ones mostly affected because that's how the flu works. But I've also read about, like, for example, troop movements. Like soldiers, healthy young men in their like 18 to 25 years old would get in a train car and, go to the next base or whatever. And when they opened the doors to let them out, it'd be a train car full of dead bodies. Like, within the time it took the train to get from one place to another, which was usually, a couple of hours, they would have all died without having shown symptoms from before. It wiped out entire islands in the Pacific. There was one particular report of there was one island where there was a military base on one side and a small village on the other, or a town on the other, and they kept in contact through like a radio. And the flu hit the town, and so they were sending radio messages to the base about like how it was spreading and how many people were getting it, and then they just stopped sending messages. And eventually, the troops from the base were able to get across the island and over the mountain, and everyone in the town was dead. This is the disease that is the reason why a lot of Asian countries, like specifically Japan, why if you so much as have the sniffles, you wear a face mask, because it killed so many people in these heavily populated cities. That if you get sick, it is your duty to protect others from spreading that disease, because it might be something bad. This changed a lot of culture around the world because of how bad it was. And I remember watching a documentary on this back in like 2014, 2015. And at the end it said something along the lines of, it's been almost 100 years since this happened, and the these sort of pandemics tend to occur every 100 years or so, so we're almost overdue. Yeah. Boy, it sure would be nice if people would learn from history. But anyway, yeah, it was real bad. Like, I can't, I mean, 50 to 100 million people worldwide when our population was much smaller than it is today. It was not quite Black Death levels bad, but it was pretty close. It was the worst we've had since the Black Death. I will say that. Anyway, more anti-Bolshevism stuff. Some more demonstrations. Oh yeah. Again, especially being where we are in the South, there's so much like anti-union rhetoric. I mean, like pretty sure I told you guys where, like, even at GE, the guy couldn't even bring his freaking cornhole board in because it had a firefighter symbol on it, and the symbol was apparently a firefighters union. But the reason we have all the rights we have as workers today is because of labor unions. 8-hour workday, 40-hour work week, overtime pay, vacation time, workman's comp, child labor laws, which are apparently up for question again. Yeah, are all because of labor unions. So, you know, so here again we have more of these strikes. There's Hoover. I don't think this is him as president. But here he is in the FBI, or technically the Bureau of Investigation. It isn't the FBI yet. I didn't have this picture originally, but when I was working upstate, I was talking about how it's like, yeah, Hoover's in everything. And one of my fellow historians at Tri-County Tech was like, hey, do you have that picture? He specifically said, do you have that picture of Hoover with the Tommy gun? It's like, no, I do not. Where is that picture of Hoover with the Tommy gun? So I made sure to get that picture. So there it is. I didn't have it my first year or two of teaching, but now I do, and now everyone gets to see that picture of Hoover with the Tommy gun. Less amusing than Hoover with the Tommy gun. Once again, a bit of a callback to more recent times. They very quickly ran out of hospital rooms and were setting up these isolation wards in this looks like maybe an airplane hangar or a school gymnasium. I mean, I remember I lived right next to MUSC in Florence. They had isolation tents set up in the parking lots there because they ran out of hospital rooms within the first couple of weeks. And then when I got COVID, they pretty much said as long as you feel like you can breathe, you need to stay at home because we don't have rooms. And there were a couple of times when I felt like I couldn't breathe, but there wasn't anything I could do about it because I certainly couldn't get out of bed to make it to the hospital. So yeah, it was bad, is the easiest way I can put it. It killed a lot of people. And it wasn't that we did anything wrong that we could have done to stop it. This is just the cycle of nature coming back to bite us in the ass. We do our best to kill each other, but nature reminds us that she's a lot better at it than we are. This is the spread. Although this is a much older map, as you can tell. It's mostly concentrating around the ports. But more updated maps show that it actually probably started inland in near some of the army bases. Hey, look, here's an old thing that looks familiar. Use a handkerchief and do your bit to protect me. Colds, influenza, pneumonia, and tuberculosis are spread, through droplets, etc. Which again was like the anti-mask thing. Was like, oh, it's not protecting me, so why should I wear it? Because you're protecting other people from your nasty coughing snot self. Yeah, that was that. Is like, if you're coughing and hacking, like, keep it from getting everywhere. That's that whole point. Here we have all theaters closed until further notice, which was another thing. It was like, oh, why are we closing down, like, places where people congregate? That's going to hurt the economy. Well, millions of people dying would hurt the economy. Freaking ghouls. Yeah. Spread through droplet spray from the nose and throat. Cover each cough and sneeze. Spread by contact. Avoid crowds. Well, I mean, that's just an everyday thing for me. If possible, walk to work. That'd be nice. Do not spit on floor or sidewalk. Yeah. This was the early 1900s. Do not use common drinking cups and common towels, which, again, gross. Avoid excessive fatigue. Yeah. Don't get tired. That's great. If taken ill, go to bed and send for a doctor. Above all, the above applies to colds, bronchitis, pneumonia, and tuberculosis, which in general, just, yeah. I mean, they understood that much about the flu. They did sort of just have to let the 1918 flu just kind of burn out. But towards the end, they did start to develop, like, a flu vaccine. But the thing about the flu is it's a virus and it mutates real fast. So that's why if you do get the flu shot, you have to basically get a new one every year because it's different by the next year. Here we are. Spanish influenza has endangered the prosecution of the war in Europe. There are 1,500 cases in the Navy Yard. 30 deaths have already resulted. Spitting spreads Spanish influenza. Don't spit, especially in the freaking Navy Yard, man. Again, I know a lot of ex-Navy guys. I'm not going to say they're gross. That'd be rude. Well, okay, I know one Navy guy. He was definitely gross. Yeah. This is my favorite one, though. This is just like the back of a trolley. It's like a little rail car. Just spit spreads death. Yeah, all right. Which, especially like in an enclosed thing like that, you're spitting on the... No, come on, that's public transit. Don't do that. There's a difference in spitting on like the side of a sidewalk and in a freaking place where people are sitting, riding to work. Come on. This one's a little dramatic. Dude refused to don an influenza mask, started like approaching the officer like a freaking zombie. Dudes get shot in the arm and leg, sent to the hospital and arrested. Which, yeah. Also, I think that's the last one. Yeah. Also, I remember, again, I think this might have been from that documentary I saw. I want to say it started to like die down a little bit in the winter or during the summer. I don't know, whichever part of the year the flu isn't as bad. So I believe it was San Francisco. They decided they were going to have a big parade, and the health officials were like, that's a terrible idea, because that's a bunch of you idiots out on the street all packed together. And all the people were like, no, we're going to do it anyway. And so they did. And 24 hours later, there was like 800 people dead, because that's how long it takes for the flu to incubate and then kill you. And yeah. So, just saying, it's happened before, and it happened again, and I'm just saying, like, we go through history. It's not just like, hey, here's a bunch of dry information about stuff that's never going to be important. I mean, yeah. This is the sort of stuff that shouldn't be that important. It's like, hey, look, there's this thing that happened 100 years ago that's pretty obvious. And if it were to ever happen again, it should be pretty obvious. But I guess freaking not. Anyway, we still have like 20 minutes left, but considering what's coming up next, this might take the last 20 minutes. So, let's talk about things so much worse than the Spanish flu. So between 1917 and 1918, more than 400,000 African Americans left the South to head to the North for industrial jobs because, well, we needed a lot of people working industrial jobs. Also to escape racial discrimination and poverty because, well, the South sucks when it comes to racial discrimination and poverty. Even today, we don't have a whole lot of heavy industry. I've just started a security job at like Otis Elevator, which is not downtown Florence. It's off towards 95, and like they're boasting about how like they're one of the few like manufacturing things in the South. It's like, yeah, we don't have a whole lot of manufacturing going on, because it is just sort of out of the middle of nowhere. By 1930, another 800,000 moved north. This was known as the Great Exodus. Newspapers like the Chicago Defender told of great opportunities in the north. 75,000 blacks headed to Chicago alone. During the First World War, many African Americans got jobs in heavy industries, which was far better than what they had before, which was largely like sharecropping, which is not meant to give you any kind of social mobility. Sharecropping is meant to keep you poor and dependent on the white landowners who want you dead anyway. So working heavy industries is going to be a lot better regardless. Even if heavy industries is going to be dangerous and not going to pay great, it's going to be paid better than almost nothing. Not great is still better than almost nothing. Still, though, the North wasn't quite the utopia it was advertised as. As I mentioned, the South was still a lot of poverty. And while it was certainly worse for black Americans, it still wasn't great for white Americans, at least the ones that weren't the landowners. So there were a lot of white migrants who went to the North for these industrial jobs and competed with blacks for these factory jobs as well. So in 1919, a number of race riots erupted across 25 cities. And by race riots, I mean mostly like mass lynchings. The worst of these happened in Chicago in July, which poet James Johnson called Red Summer. I'll read this one from the book. James Weldon Johnson, who was a poet and NAACP official, called Red Summer. On a hot July day, a black youth swimming at a Lake Michigan beach inadvertently crossed over into an area of water customarily reserved for whites. So there was no like boundary. It's just like, hey, you crossed our imaginary line. In response, white bathers shouted at the swimmer to return to the black section of the beach. To make their point more forcefully, they hurled stones at him. The black swimmer drowned, and word of the incident quickly spread through white and black neighborhoods in Chicago. For 13 days, mobs of black and whites attacked each other, ransacked businesses, and torched homes. Over the course of the riots, at least 15 whites and 23 blacks died, 178 whites and 342 blacks were injured, and more than 1,000 black families were left homeless. Against this background, D.C. Stevenson's Ku Klux Klan began to flourish in the North because, of course, and we're not going to talk about Chicago because there's a lot of other stuff going on, but for that I'm going to pull up some images. So, let's get into that. First, let's talk about the migration. So let's pull back a little bit from the the fighting and the killing. Um, this is a pretty interesting map. Is it in the book? No, it's not. Um, so you got like most of the folks on the East Coast just stayed along the East Coast and headed north. A little further west just went to kind of the Midwest. Here we've got, in the book specifically mentions, the Exodusters. Remember them from like the second chapter? A lot of them went to the Midwest, but some of them actually headed west instead to California. So that's kind of cool. So this separate group here that weren't in the traditional like South, some of them headed west, so they're not actually part of what we're going to talk about here in a minute. But this map mentions them, and since we talked about them earlier, and I like specifically put them on the test, I wanted to mention that. Obviously, since this is a map and not like in the notes, we're not going to talk about the Exodusters again. But since I found a map that mentioned them, I just wanted to bring them up. So, yeah, that's kind of neat. Also, this is pre Dust Bowl, which is when a lot of people were like heading west to California to get away from everything going to hell in the Midwest. So this is like a pre Okies. Grapes of Wrath kind of thing. So here again is another Great Migration, which doesn't include the Exodusters, but this is the Great Migration is mostly associated with this group. Here we go. The reason for heading north, and well, it's kind of obvious. Not a whole lot of welcome in the South, to put it rather plainly. And then when you get to the north, it's not especially welcome either. Here we have the St. Louis Globe, specifically the Democrat St. Louis Globe, and at first I was like, it's weird that the Democrat St. Louis Globe is even mentioning that black Americans are being murdered in this, quote, race war, because, well, again, this was before the party switch, so the Democrats are the party of the Klan. But then I was like, wait, maybe they're like they're putting the numbers up as like, hey, look how many we killed. So, I don't know. This is like 1918, 1919, 1920. This is when they are just going to literally cheer. I would say, oh yeah, this is like the early 1900s. They literally cheer about it. But we are, well, not say we. People are literally cheering about like crying families being deported to like third world nations they're not actually from. So what do I know? Major race riots and lynchings of the Red Summer. So yeah, Chicago's the main one we talked about. And you know, it's mostly talking about the North, but like obviously Georgia's got to get involved and have freaking 7. Georgia. Weird that South Carolina only has 1. I guess because we only have like 1 major city, which is to say Charleston. Everywhere else is like rural. So, this is how I described this to my Tuesday, Thursday class. These are, and you're going to have to pardon my French, but I've got no better way of saying it than this. These are a bunch of Charlottesville-looking motherfuckers that are just going to come together and drag people off of buses because they're cowards and lynch them. This is not what we're going to see. I'll get to this in a minute. A lot of times, again, propaganda where it's like, oh no, we have to kill them because we have to kill them first because they're going to kill us. Plans to kill all whites, slaughter to begin with 21 prominent men as the first victims. Armed themselves, plan to kill every white person in sight when plot was exposed. Totally a legit thing that definitely happened. Let's see, where do we have some more of these? I mean, tell me this doesn't look like one of those idiots in a polo shirt with a tiki torch. Three dead, 50 hurt in race riot in Chicago. Clash when Color Boy invades white district. Yeah. Invades. Totally. Police shoot in a mob because they're good at that. Women join in fighting. Troops withdrawn. Now, I'm of two minds about this. Where sowing for both races to reap. So you've got race antagonism, and then also this, where it's like, you know, you've got the black riders and the white riders, and you've got to treat them both rough. So on the one hand, it's saying that both sides are to blame. And on the one hand, you obviously have the racism from the whites, because obviously. And on the other hand, you definitely have where the African Americans are going to be wary of the white Americans because they've been enslaved for several hundred years, and then for the last, I don't know, it's what, 1910 now? For the last like 50 years, they've been treated as less than human. So yeah, there's going to be like racial tension at the very least. But to say they're equal, but I will at least say that, like, quote, treating them equal is doing more, it's more progressive than saying it's 100% the blacks as like these subhuman animals that are trying to eat our women or whatever that we had before. So this is like a step forward in a way. Because it's at least saying that the whites are doing something wrong. Like, it's not perfect, but it's a step forward. So, yeah. Now, that said, and I think it's is it the next thing? Yeah, okay. And since we do only have 10 minutes left, there is no way I can go forward from this, so this is where we're going to end. Okay. Pre-warning. This next image is the worst image I've ever had in any of my classes. But it's important. And it shows why this is wrong. And why, where's it at? This is such a terrifying image. Because it's never just they're pulling a guy off of a bus because they don't want him on the bus. They're not just going to pull him off the bus and like make him walk to where he's going. It never ends there. It's never just a couple of knuckleheads fighting. It's never just, oh, well, make them stop fighting and everything will be fine. It's not just one guy fighting one guy. So, with that out of the way, it's this. It's a bunch of these, once again, the only way I can put it, the only way I can say it is Charlottesville-looking motherfuckers in their nice shirts and their ties, in this child, having a great time, smiling, getting together, squeezing together for the camera. Some of these guys are even leaning in to make sure they're in the shot, with the burned remains of a black man, I assume, it's hard to tell, in the middle of the street. Because this is what they did. This is what the end result of pulling a man out of a bus looks like. This is what lynching looks like. This is what white supremacy looks like. These people don't deserve to live. These people don't deserve to exist. It's not just let's put them aside and, out of sight, out of mind. It's we should burn them in the street. It's they shouldn't exist violently. And that's what it looked like 100 years ago. That's what it looked like in the 1930s and 1940s. That's what it looked like in the 1960s. Let's be real. And that's what it always looks like. And I feel like this is a good way to end. Certainly not on a happy note, but history is ugly. And it's important that we learn from history, because some people don't. And also because the next section is on the economy, and that's boring. But there's also a lot to that, so we got to get into that next time. So yeah, that's post-war America so far. The Roaring '20s. We'll get into the economy of that next time. So I'll let you guys out a little early, and I'll see you all on Wednesday.